Well, thank you, Constance, for that kind introduction, and thank you, everybody, for being here. I'll be wary of that, but I really do. Maybe that will help. Maybe that will help. Now closer here. Okay. Yeah. Anyway, there. That's better. Okay. So really, I do thank everyone for coming today, and I also wanted to thank the Coaxic Club for allowing us to give this presentation. And the first thing I want to tell everybody, sort of off the bat, is that I am a lifelong liberal Democrat. And this is not a partisan issue. So not only do I believe in climate change, I believe we have an urgent need to solve this problem, and we need to solve it now. But I also understand that as an individual, I have a duty to help. But I also want to talk to you about the facts of these projects. So I first learned about these projects about a year ago. And I did because the closest one, Revolution Wind, was already well into the permitting process when I became aware of the plan, just because I noticed some survey boats out in the water. I've devoted the last year of my life to researching this issue, and I'm here today to tell you pretty much what I have discovered. So here is just an outline of what I'm going to be talking about. First, I'm going to just introduce the need we have to inform the public and what's going on here, and then give a brief overview of the projects right off of our coast and off the coast of Rhode Island and Massachusetts. Then talk about the environmental impacts, discuss a little bit the effect these projects will have on climate change, and then sort of ask the question about, can we trust the developers? Spoiler alert, the developers are the fossil fuel companies. And then later talk about our mission, Green Oceans' mission. So initially, when the Inflation Reduction Act basically injected almost $400 billion into the renewable energy space, we all assumed that offshore wind would be a good answer to the climate change problem. We assumed that even if it stressed our local environment, that it would be good for the planet. And, most everybody, I'm sure, in the room believes that, climate change is one of the worst problems facing us right now. And that we all understand that, it's going to take personal sacrifice. So if it's our view out there or our ocean, maybe that's okay if we're going to actually save the planet. So what is the plan for offshore wind? Since all the states have adopted these mandates to adopt renewable energy, what are Rhode Island and Massachusetts planning on doing? So I'm going to take you briefly through the facts. Who's doing it? What are they planning? And where are they located? The who. So who are these developers? The one responsible for the projects right off of the coast of Rhode Island is a company called the Danish Oil and Natural Gas Company. It changed its name to Ørsted so that people wouldn't realize or wouldn't make the connection with the Danish oil and natural gas. The other projects off of the coast are Norwegian Statoil, which changed its name to Equinor, British Petroleum, Avangrid, which is a Spanish energy company, and Shell Oil. These are all international companies, and they're all linked to the fossil fuel industry. So what are they doing? They're building 9 offshore wind developments, and these are going to occupy 1,400 square miles of ocean, 1.5 times the landmass of the whole state of Rhode Island. So this slide actually shows the locations of all the projects. And you can see at the top here, these are the names of the projects, the companies that are developing them, and then the states where the energy is going to. So I don't know how many are here from Rhode Island, but Rhode Island is only getting 1/18 of the energy, even though all 9 of the projects are pretty much right on its coastline. Massachusetts is not faring all that well either, though, if you consider how Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard are going to be affected. But as you can see, these are all the international companies, and yet Americans, through the Inflation Reduction Act, are going to be paying 30% of the construction costs. They'll be getting no equity in it, but they'll be paying 30% of the construction costs. The 9 projects will contain over 1,000 turbines, and each of these turbines is going to range between about 800 to over 1,100 feet in height. So how tall is that? Well, the tallest turbine right now in the world is about 853. The ones in Revolution Wind are going to be about 1,000. So that's taller than the Eiffel Tower, about the height of the Chrysler Building, and taller than any building in Boston. So this is a slide that just shows for size comparison. I was trying to find something that you all might be able to relate to. So Cuttyhunk is 150 feet high at its highest point. It is about, this picture was taken at the same distance that these windmills are going to be. So this is almost 6 times the height of Cuttyhunk from the distance in Rhode Island anyway. So where are these located? Not all ocean is the same, as a fisherman right here knows. And this is a topographic map that shows the different depths of the ocean. So the dark blue right here is deeper, and this lighter turquoise is a shallower part of the ocean. So this area right here that you can see in my map is something called Cox's Ledge. It's boulders that came thousands and thousands of years ago from the glaciers, and it's developed this incredibly fertile, very rich marine ecosystem. It's called Cox's Ledge. So Cox's Ledge is teeming with wildlife. Dolphins are there all year round. We have humpback whales, minke whales, the North Atlantic right whale, who spend much of the year consuming the rich plankton life that blooms there. But perhaps most importantly, it is one of the last remaining cod spawning grounds in all of the New England area. So where are these turbines going to be located? They will cover almost the entire region of Cox's Ledge. Those are the interarray cables. Why is this happening? Because it's cheaper for the company to install turbines in shallower depths. This is tantamount to actually building right on top of a coral reef, because Cox's Ledge has a kind of ecosystem that's both fragile and incredibly important to the entire ecosystem of New England. So can you imagine the hue and cry if people were deciding to do wind farms right on a coral reef? And that's essentially what they're doing. So should we be worried about this? Well, it turns out that NOAA scientists are worried about this. They sent a letter to BOEM, which is the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, which is the agency that actually permits these projects. And they wrote that this project is going to have a high risk of population level impact. So a population level impact in government speak is actually extinction. It has a high risk of extinction for southern New England cod, and it will result in significant alterations to the Cox's ecosystem. So what did BOEM do? It ignored those warnings. So I'm going to go on and talk a little bit more about the environmental impact, not just Cox's Ledge, but the overall environmental impact. So will offshore wind farms or projects harm whales, and why should we care? So this is a recent photo from a construction site, the South Fork construction site, right around Cox's Ledge. And you can see that a whale has not fared well when it decided to traverse the area. So what about other whales, particularly the critically endangered North Atlantic right whale? The North Atlantic right whale has only 70 remaining reproductively active females and only 334 individuals left in the whole population. So because of the Marine Mammal Protection Act from 1972, you're actually not allowed to harm or harass whales. But if you ask permission first, you are. So NOAA can give permissions, and right now they are granting offshore wind companies over 1,000 permissions to harm North Atlantic right whales. But it's not just the right whales. In total, NOAA is granting offshore wind companies permission to harm over 20,000 whales, almost 500,000 dolphins, and over 100,000 seals. But they don't tell you this because they evaluate each project individually and they don't add up all the numbers. And it's actually quite difficult to find that. So what about birds? We know that onshore turbines hurt birds. We have a particular bird in our area called the piping plover, which Eric and Jane, who are in the audience here, know about because they've done a lot of work to try to protect these birds. Well, it turns out the migration path for piping plovers are right through the big swath of those 9 projects. In fact, the entire migratory route is going to be littered with wind farms if these projects all go forward. So this is a map of the entire East Coast and the wind farms that are planned for the East Coast. So what is the overall impact to our fisheries, given what's going on here? So what will happen to the commercial, the recreational, and even the subsistence fisher people that rely on fishing? So although, people have talked about the artificial reef that happens with the jacketed turbines, all of these projects are going to have monopile turbines, so they don't produce or they don't create the sort of artificial reef that people have talked about. And it turns out that the government itself says that the overall cumulative impact to commercial fisheries and for-hire recreational fishing would be major adverse. So they only give 3 ratings. One is minor, moderate, and major. So this is going to be the worst possible outcome. So we might all say to ourselves, well, climate change is worse and all these bad things are going to happen anyway. The warming ocean is going to kill the whales and climate change is going to kill all the fish. So, if we can fight climate change, then all these environmental risks might be worth it. But will these wind farms really help climate change? So our US government actually wrote in the environmental impact statement for Vineyard Wind that there will be no collective impact on global warming as a result of all the wind projects, including the proposed action. It also wrote that it anticipates that the proposed action on, this is the one on Cox's Ledge, Revolution Wind, will have no measurable influence on climate change. So when I've talked to people about this, they've said, well, maybe climate change is global, so maybe it's too big an issue for an individual wind farm or even a collection of wind farms to actually help. So what about reducing carbon dioxide? Well, it turns out that there's actually been no study ever that uses empiric data, so real data from real wind developments, that has shown in peer-reviewed journals that any wind farm has ever reduced carbon dioxide emissions. Nor have they ever had a single published study that shows that it reduces our dependency on fossil fuels. So I can't tell you exactly what is going on with this, but I can tell you that the Revolution Wind Project doesn't want me to be able to look at their methodology. They've kept their emissions calculations and their methodology confidential. We've even applied for a Freedom of Information Act, and they won't release it to me. So people assume that a single kilowatt hour of electricity produced by a wind farm is going to replace a kilowatt hour of fossil fuel generated electricity. But it turns out even the liberal Washington Post 7 years ago ran a story that said that wind and solar have a secret friend. It's called natural gas. And the more renewables you have, the bigger the problem can be. So it's a well-known fact, and anybody who drives a gasoline car knows that on the highway you get much better miles per hour than you do in the city. So the problem with wind is the intermittency. When the wind goes to zero, and every sailor out here knows that the wind does go to zero every once in a while, you have to have 100% of your energy needs supplied by natural gas or some fossil fuel generated electricity. That generator was on idle, and all of a sudden, it has to go up to 100%. When you do that, it's like turning your car on and off and on and off. You produce less electricity, but there's a higher cost. You use more energy, or gasoline, or natural gas. You get less energy, and you emit more carbon dioxide. It's like city traffic versus highway traffic. So what can we learn from Europe? They've done a lot of offshore wind, and they've done a lot of renewables. And in fact, everyone says, Europe is so far advanced. So we need to do this because Europe has been doing this. Well, there's not a single paper about, how these wind farms have affected carbon dioxide or our dependency on natural gas, as I said, but there is circumstantial evidence. Renewables have not made a single dent in our dependency on fossil fuels. And in fact, when Russia turned off the gas for Germany, they had to resort to burning coal. So Germany actually has twice as much renewables as it needs to power the entire country. And yet they had to burn coal, and they had to start tearing down their forests. I have my slides a little out of whack here. They had to sacrifice their ancient forests to start producing energy. Germany is even dismantling its wind farms now to produce coal. Coal's about as dirty as you can get. So what about the poster child for renewable energy, Denmark? Ørsted is the Danish oil and natural gas, now, the renewable energy company. Denmark still uses wood for 25% of its electricity generation. They're causing deforestation around the world because they have to import that wood. So if these things are not actually going to help climate change, why don't we know about it? Well, big oil hid the whole effects of the fossil fuel industry on climate change for decades. And these are the same companies. So the WBUR ran a story about whether we can trust big oil now that it wants to be big wind. So I can tell you that I don't know whether we can trust them, but I know that they're trying to hide something. So it has restricted almost 50% of their technical reports. They won't let the public know what the emergency response plan is. They won't let the people know what the safety management system is. They won't, as I said before, expose how they calculate their air emissions. They won't show us the visual effects on our historical resources. And perhaps most importantly to a lot of people, they won't even reveal how it's going to change the economy in our states. So this is some evidence that I found. This is a photo simulation that Ørsted released to the public depict, can you all hear me? So this is a this is a photo simulation that Ørsted released to the public depicting the view from Second Beach in Newport. The nearest turbine is 16.2 miles from shore. And this picture is fairly reassuring. I can't really see any turbines. Can you all see turbines there? No. However, on paper, they admit that from that same beach, you're going to see over 500 turbines. So here's a different simulation, and this one is on the government site. So I can see the turbines here, and this is between 16 and 21 miles away. So this one was 16.2 miles. This is 16 to 21 miles. To me, that's a big difference. And it turns out I found that they have two sets of simulations for everything, Ørsted does. One they release to the public, and the other they provide the government. So the top one here is a view from Block Island, and the top one is what they gave to the government, but it's confidential to the public. I can see the turbines there. The bottom one is what they revealed to the public. I can't see the turbines there. So Westport is going to be affected. In that same cumulative effects analysis that I showed, it turns out that Westport Harbor is going to see 582 turbines. There are 7 historic landmarks that will see over 400 turbines in Westport. And, you know, this is not just going to affect the property owners along the ocean. These are public beaches that are going to be affected. They actually say in their own documents that 625 public beaches will be adversely affected by these windmills, and 121 registered historic places. So our final question is, what about decommissioning? If we're a little bit worried about the honesty and the straightforwardness and transparency of these companies, what are they going to do about decommissioning? So one of the things that these energy companies are doing is that once they build the companies, they turn them into limited liability companies, which means that they have no responsibility for anything once they're in the water. So our government has decided to not require that they put aside any money for decommissioning for the first 10 years. But if a hurricane comes through after the first year and they're all down, there's no money there. The ratepayers are the ones to pay for it. The other thing is our government is not requiring that they do any actual specific plans for decommissioning. All they have to do is a conceptual idea of what they plan of decommissioning, and there are no environmental impact statements for those decommissioning plans. So some people have worries about what's going to happen when these big mechanical machines that hold over 600 gallons each of lubricants and up to 1,400 gallons of diesel fuel start to break down. Some people in Europe have even estimated that the cost of decommissioning is going to be 70% of the cost of construction. Right now, each turbine costs $50 million to construct, and we're going to have 1,000 of them off of our shores. So, you know, Green Oceans was formed as a result of me finding out about all of these problems. And we have decided to make this a mission. So our message is that offshore wind will not help climate change. Offshore wind harms the ocean, and the offshore wind developers have misled us. Our goals are to protect the ocean. We need to promote climate change solutions that will actually work. The ocean produces more than half of our oxygen. It absorbs so much of our carbon dioxide. The ocean is a sick patient right now. We cannot ask a sick patient to shoulder all the burdens of our energy needs right now. We also want to preserve biodiversity, which would mean stopping the construction on Cox's Ledge. We have a petition out here that you all can sign if you're interested about stopping construction on Cox's Ledge in particular. We want to stop all construction, but that is a particularly bad place, and that is the first place that they're building on. And so we need to stop that now. So part of, and the third goal is to do no harm. So we would like to stress other solutions that will minimize harm, even if they don't do no harm. And one easy thing is that in Rhode Island, we have Bitcoin mining that actually uses 1,700 megawatts of electricity per year. Revolution Wind is going to supply 160 megawatts to Rhode Island. If we just outlawed Bitcoin mining, we could get rid of all of these wind farms. China has outlawed Bitcoin mining. So, we can at least do that. There are many other things that we're trying to investigate, but when people ask me, so what are the solutions right now? I don't have the answers. Just like as a physician, if somebody asks me if a particular drug will, solve cancer, if I know that it has far more effects and no proven benefits, I'm not going to recommend that medicine without actually being able to cure cancer. So I am saying right now that offshore wind does not work to help us achieve the goals that we need to achieve. And so what is our plan? Part of our plan is doing this tonight, just informing people, educating people, having community outreach. And that's why I so appreciate the fact that everyone came tonight. The other is research. There's not enough research out there that actually shows one way or another whether these things will work. So it turns out that Texas has 37 gigawatts of wind, and yet Texas emits more carbon dioxide every year than all of New England put together times 5. So we'd like to understand that. And then we also have some federal and state lawsuits that we are initiating. So we need your help. We have a website. We have a white paper that has 30 pages of well-documented research, and if people would read that and try to understand it and communicate to other people, that would be a wonderful thing in terms of helping move this forward. Also ask questions. Anybody who has a question tonight, I would love to answer it if I can. And I also have other members of Green Oceans here to help me answer questions. We have our petition out there. I'd love people to sign and then join us. We have a sign up on our website, and you can, there are lots of ways you can join our efforts here. So here's just a list of the people on our executive committee right now. Here are the QR codes for our website and our white paper, and I want to leave you with one quote. And I particularly like this quote because one of our executive board meeting members is a direct descendant of Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has.
Thank you. Can you tell us more about the research that's being done at the university level? If you would speak about the Brown University study that was put forth by some students?
Yeah. Well, that has been an elephant in the room frequently. Brown, I don't know if people know about this, but there is a Brown University sociology professor who had his students, his undergraduate students, write a report about green oceans and our tactics, stating um, that we disseminated misinformation and that we were trying to delay effective treatments for climate change. It was a student class paper. It was partially paid for by Climate Jobs Rhode Island, which is funded by Ørsted, the Danish company. It was never peer reviewed. It had no editorial oversight and no proper academic, vetting. They put it on their website, and it has been touted as the Brown Report. So it has been a hard thing to actually combat because it has real defamation. But we actually have hired a lawyer to try to help us with that.
Has your research been peer reviewed?
Well, I have to say I am not, my professional work has been peer reviewed because this has not been peer reviewed or published, no, but what we would like to do the research on the Texas. Well, I should hold back for a minute. Everything I quoted here comes from the government documents. So the only thing that does not come from the government documents are the circumstantial evidence I talked about with regard to what's going on in Europe. But
All of this been the environmental impacts, were they all disclosed in the environmental impacts?
yes, and I have the page numbers listed.
And where's the permit?
Well, every project is at a different stage. They did the record of decision to permit it on August 21st. They have not disclosed the biological opinion from NOAA. So as the last time I checked, NOAA had not actually granted all of the incidental takes that they've requested yet. So it can't actually go forward until that happens. But I'm expecting that to happen within days to weeks.
Hi there. I'm Ted Gebhardt. I've got about 35 years in the renewable energy development business, mechanical engineer, wind, solar, biomass, and coal. I actually agree with much of what you're saying. I'd like you to comment about the regressive nature of the power rates that are going to hit people when these things go in. And people have no idea how expensive these things are versus alternatives that are out there. Thank you.
Well, I would love to have a longer conversation with you because it sounds like you could give us a lot of important information, and I appreciate you saying that you agree with us. So I have another member of Green Oceans who can talk more more intelligently about the rates, but this is a slide just from the Department of Energy that shows that offshore wind is going to be the most expensive form of energy out there.
The only thing I would add is that we know this because the power purchase agreement for Revolution Wind is set at basically $199. The wholesale price of electricity for the first 7 months in Rhode Island was about $25. So it's double the price of the wholesale price. Rock Island wind farm started at $244 megawatt hour, and it has price escalators every year. So this year, Rock Island's PPA is $211. So how this is being inexpensive energy beyond. So whether it's the intermittency, whether it's the production cost, whatever.
Statistics you showed up there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a important question or thing to clarify. So NOAA has two levels of harm that they give out. One is called a level A take, and the other is a level B take. So level B includes it's a level B harassment. It includes temporary injury. It also includes behavioral stress and disruption. So it can include making whales, for instance, leave their normal foraging grounds and have to search for food elsewhere. It can be temporary hearing loss, and it can be disruption of their normal social communication with each other, which is it's a huge problem for whales because they're social animals and they actually communicate with each other in order to avoid harm and to find food. And calves are particularly dependent on their mothers, and they use sounds to try to communicate or to keep tabs with each other. So so the level B takes have been described as basically not very important, but they can have major impacts on individuals and populations. Level A can include anything from permanent injury to death, although it's not expected to be death. It can include that.
One thing I would add to that is a gentleman named Michael Schellenberger.
Excuse me, we're going to have to talk into the microphone.
I think I can turn it off.
Well, it's because people at home won't be able to hear.
Oh, okay. All right.
So, go ahead. Oh, who was,
I'm done.
Oh, and Constance, this woman up here has been.
okay, yes, this gentleman over here. Oh, you're good, okay.
Okay, Constance here. She's had her hand up from the very beginning.
Sorry. I'm sorry, where?
Right here.
Thank you. I have been over East Beach and seen the barges going out. I've only seen one barge with 3 turbines. What is happening out there? How much progress has been made? I think it was the A. Was that Avangard or
Avangrid?
Avangard, the one over in New Bedford?
Oh, I think that's Vineyard Wind.
They have A on the turbines, A and a number. Anyway.
So I'll show you which project that is. Sorry, I have to go through all this. The one that's being staged out of New Bedford is the Vineyard Wind one, and that is there's got to be a better way. Right here. Okay, so right here, this sort of maroon colored one is the Vineyard Wind.
Oh, it has A. Okay, that's why there's an A on the turbine.
And this is South Fork.
This right here is South Fork, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Vineyard Wind is this one right here, sort of maroonish
Any
colored.
idea how many have been installed yet?
I don't
No, ma'am?
actually, yeah.
Does anybody know or?
There's 62 turbine bases, foundations being installed for Vineyard Wind, and I think many of them have been installed. I think they are working on the first actual putting in the actual turbine itself. All of the bases have been installed for South Fork, but that's a smaller project. It's only 12, but they're lining up for the rest of them to go in.
Is it true that the transfer stations changing the current from AC to DC use 7 million gallons of ocean water a day? And they heat it and return it to the ocean?
Yes, and they also put different kinds of like fungicides and things like that in it. So yes, the offshore substations are particularly damaging to the environment. So not only do they use fresh water, or not fresh water, but ocean water to cool down the DC currents, they also house something called sulfur hexafluoride, sorry. And actually quite a large amount of this. And that particular chemical is 23,000 times more potent a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And in these substations out in the middle of the ocean where we have hurricanes, the vulnerability we have to a leak is huge. Each turbine also has some of this, what they call SF6, but that is not as worrisome as the substations themselves. So the substations don't get a lot of discussion, but they're incredibly damaging.
Oh, it's on now. Okay. I did a quick calculation, and a 1,000-foot tower can be seen for 36 miles, just FYI. My real question is, it's a great presentation. We're very concerned about it. I see it's being recorded. We'd very much like, in order to disseminate this, to be able to spread these recordings around, send them to our friends and so forth. It's important. And so will you put this on your website once this is
If I can stand hearing my own voice and watching myself, I will.
Yeah. I think it's important.
I have a question. I have another question. Is there any comparison in mammal fatalities, like whale deaths or dolphin deaths, or changes in migration patterns that has happened prior to any of this? Like, do scientists have, or is there access to research that's been done on whale deaths over the last, say, 10, 20, 30, 40 years? And with that, has anything been researched in Europe prior to and since their installation of their wind farms?
Well, the whale death thing has gotten a lot of press right now. And we do know that sonar does hurt whales. The Navy knew that a long time ago, and that's one of the reasons why they are blamed for whale deaths a lot, and they try to avoid them. The sonar that they're using right now is not supposed to be as strong as the Navy sonar, and so the wind companies are stating that it's not related, and the government is backing that up. So, NOAA is always saying that there's no correlation. There's no proof, so they haven't done the studies to prove it, but there is definitely a temporal correlation. So the wind companies started doing seismic surveys back in 2016 and 2017, and there are 3 unusual mortality events, meaning more whales have been dying than usual since 2016 and 2017. And then when they really picked up the pace over the last year after the Inflation Reduction Act injected the $400 billion into renewable energy, we've now had quite a few deaths. Europe has not been very eager to do the research on this. So right after they put up one of their biggest farms in the North Sea, they had 28 sperm whales die and beach themselves. And I don't know if you all know what sperm whales are, but they have the largest brains of any mammal on the planet. And it's heartbreaking to see the pictures of those whales. Nobody asked the question of whether or not the wind farms were involved. Well, Woods Hole has received a lot of money in the tens of millions to form a ocean laboratory to study the effects of the wind farms. Unfortunately, that's going to happen after they're already constructed. That study has been funded by a combination of the offshore wind companies and the agency that is actually, or at least partially funded by the agency, BOEM, and possibly by the Department of Energy. I'm not sure exactly.
Have they tested any of these windmills for how they'll perform in hurricane force winds?
The North Sea does not get hurricane force winds. So it is unclear what's going to happen. And it seems to me like the taller they are, the more vulnerable they're going to be. And they have pretty much reached the maximum size you can possibly get for a mechanical structure like this. Oh, I'm sure they have. I'm sure they have. But, you know, all it is modeling. Yeah. Oh, maybe not. Maybe I think hurricane level 3, but not above. And we certainly can get higher than hurricane level 3 here.
One thing we can add to that, Siemens is a company that makes a lot of these components, blades, et cetera. And their stock, I don't know if you saw it, 2 months ago, stock killed for like 25-30% in one day. And not being else, but their components were not lasting even years beyond their original stock.
Yeah, hello. Very informative presentation, and I rarely find myself on the same side as a liberal Democrat. But anyways, I guess what I'm afraid of, and I've been to New Bedford and seen the ships. I've been seeing the ships outside of Newport. I feel like the cows left the barn, and it strikes me that your efforts are tremendous. Couldn't agree with you anymore. But you need a number of wealthy benefactors, and you need lawyers. I mean, we're all nice people, and Margaret Mead is a wonderful lady, but we need lawyers. I mean, big badass lawyers.
Well, we have, yeah, we do have. As I say, Rhode Island is in the unique position of being the only state in the union that has something called the Ocean SAMP, which is the Strategic Area Management Plan. The CRMC, the Coastal Resources Management Council, is supposed to use that SAMP to protect Rhode Island's ocean resources. And that includes resources in federal waters. Unfortunately, the CRMC was very derelict in its duties in doing so. So we have, when they approved the project, so we have one lawsuit against the CRMC and Revolution Wind. We're actually in our third conversation with the Attorney General of Rhode Island on Thursday. We have 2 more law firms that we are in discussions with, one for an Endangered Species and Marine Mammal Protection Act suit, and then the other one is for the illegality of the leasing process itself. So the way BOEM actually gave out the leases before environmental impact statements were done was was just letting the cart lead the horse. So they allowed these companies to lease the area. They allowed them to get into the power purchase agreements, which are legally binding. And then when they evaluate the environmental impact statements, they say, well, you have to be able to do this much because you already have this contract to provide this much energy. And so it's very much a circular logic. So we're going to try to challenge that as well. But if you would like to help us fundraise for these 3 projects, we would be very appreciative, actually. Yeah. And the other thing I would just say about the horse being out of the barn is that my husband is in biotech, and he has funded companies that have spent billions of dollars doing research, for instance, an Alzheimer's company. Late in stage 3, they find out that it has adverse side effects and 3 patients die. they have to scrap the whole thing. So I'm sorry if these wind companies or oil companies have spent billions of dollars, but I think they'll get over it and, you know. Yes. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, mine was too, I think. I- hang on one sec.
When you speak up, we need a microphone so that people can hear. Other people can also hear what you're saying. And I think your questions are great. So I'd love for you to answer that question again, where people can hear it. But can we go here first?
Hi. Very much agree with your very first point about the urgency of climate change and your last point about Margaret Mead and your middle point about not trusting oil companies. But two clarifications. One, and by the way, this is coming from an ardent environmentalist who has worked for 40 years in the environmental space inside industry. Ørsted, to call Ørsted an oil and gas company is at best completely inaccurate and at worst disingenuous. Ørsted is probably the singular company globally that has done the best job of making a major transformation away from oil and gas to renewables. And back in back in 2009, they were 90% oil and gas, Dong Energy, as you said. They made a commitment to go 85-15 and flip that, which they did 10 years early. They're right now 95% renewable energy. They're going to be 99% in 2025. So we could only dream in this country of Exxon and Chevron and Marathon and ConocoPhillips of doing what Ørsted has done. So I think that's kind of a key point to keep in mind. Your second point that I would
Can I respond to that quickly?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I was trying to find it on my in my computer very quickly, but Ørsted actually made significant of its profits last year burning coal. So they still maintain 3 coal energy plants in Denmark. So they are still benefiting tremendously from fossil fuels. I would also add that they realized back in 2015 that their natural gas reserves were depleted to significantly. So they retired their natural gas reserves and decided to renovate their main one in the North Sea. When Russia turned off the gas, Denmark was not able to actually start producing natural gas again. Denmark's reserves are lower than Italy's. They don't have natural gas anymore, so it's not necessarily that they were trying to do good. They still burn coal.
And I'm not suggesting that they or any other company is perfect. All I'm saying is that they recognize the severity and the opportunity and made a major transformation. And they're not an oil and gas company today. They're basically a renewable energy company. Your second point, I would just really disagree with that wind energy is not part of the climate solution. It's a huge part. There's tons of information and data on that, going back to the Rio Earth Summit where I was at in '92.
Well,
and it's not an either or thing. Obviously, there's still huge problems with oil and gas. The subsidies are $7 trillion last year, higher than ever. So it's not just like more windmills will solve the problem in the absence of anything else. I just think there's a balance, and what's critical is urgent action on all renewables as fast as we possibly can, I would argue.
Well, I would love to see any data that actually proves that, because the only thing I have ever seen, and I have searched high and low, has been modeling studies. And those modeling studies assume that for every renewable gigawatt hour that renewable produces, that you'll get about the same amount in return. I've also never seen a cradle to grave analysis. So these windmills are going, they're wind turbines. The steel is going to be made most likely in China. China uses coal to produce its steel. All of the rare earth metals are going to be mined in China. The environmental consequences of that are huge. They're going to be shipped over in diesel ships. They're going to be manufactured in Europe, then shipped again in diesel ships. The concrete that they use is probably going to be manufactured in China and shipped over in diesel ships. So if we had the battery power to solve the intermittency problem, I would agree with you. But the battery power is not gonna, we're not gonna have sufficient battery power for centuries with our current technology, unless we are managed to make some sort of major innovation there. And without solving for the intermittency problem, the more we put of these of offshore wind onto the grid, the more carbon dioxide we're going to emit. And I will show you a particularly alarming slide here that proves this point in Rhode Island. So this is data from the ISO New England and data from the EPA. So you can see here that the blue line represents Rhode Island's consumption of electricity since 2013. We were actually doing better because we had more efficient appliances and we lost some industry. In 2021, it started to go up. The Bitcoin mining got kicked out of China in 2021, and Rhode Island made some passed some laws that actually attracted Bitcoin mining. So I won't look at the data after 2021, but our emissions, the red, has gone up. The green also is our addition of wind energy capacity. So as our wind energy capacity has gone up, our emissions have gone up in spite of the fact that our consumption has gone down. Now, I'm not making up this data. So this is data from ISO New England and EPA. There is another data set out there called from the Environmental Information Administration that the Department of Energy puts out. They claim that biomass, burning wood, emits 0 carbon dioxide. It is a data set that thousands of academics have actually used, and they say that burning wood emits 0 carbon dioxide. If my high school kids look at that, they're going to fail their AP chemistry exam. It is just not true. And it is a policy-driven, or it is a data set that is trying to drive policy. It's not it should not be used for academic purposes. And I know I am preaching against the consensus, but I have no reason, absolutely no reason, other than my desire for the truth to be out there, to be saying this. It's not easy to say, and I'm going up against so many people. So I don't have a $500 million or $500 billion on the line. These companies do.
Without huge subsidies from the government, would these things work? You're the gentleman that said yes. Without a 30% investment tax credit and $26 per megawatt hour production tax credit, and who knows what other tax credit they're going to get from the U.S. government, would you invest in these things? And do they work without the subsidies? I'm not trying to start a fight. I'm just saying that I think the subsidies are part of a narrative, and it's being pushed. So, and there's a chance that we could end up using and needing more fossil fuels, not less. So it's just kind of a what's the point question for me.
Couple more questions. Anybody that hasn't asked a question? Oh, thank you. I'm sorry.
excuse me, there was a article in the Wall Street Journal about 2 weeks ago that mentioned 2 or 3 of the companies on the list there, and they said they are divesting of their North American wind farms because of the fixed kilowatt contracts and the price. Is that credible? Is that happening?
Yes, I think it's happening. It's not happening off of Massachusetts and Rhode Island yet, unfortunately. I think, though, if we actually fight this, that they may be disinclined to push it, because I think the reason why, one of the reasons why it's not happening off of Rhode Island is, one, because Cox's Ledge makes it so cheap to construct it there because it's shallow. And the other reason is that Rhode Island signed those very expensive power purchase agreements. So they're actually doing.
So they're picking and choosing.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Where are the other environmental organizations on these particular wind farms that we're talking about? For example, Environmental Defense Fund, Conservation Law Foundation does a lot of work here in New England. Where are they on this issue?
You know, everybody has bought the narrative that we need offshore wind. And the problem is no one's asked the question, do they work? Do they, well, work? We know that the windmills spin, but will they achieve the goals we want? Will they reduce carbon dioxide, and will they wean us off fossil fuels? So the answer to your question is most of the environmental groups are supportive. They think we need it, they know it's going to be damaging, and they're trying to work with the companies to make sure that they minimize the damage.
And many of them have actually accepted money from the big wind, from the wind companies. They've been getting subsidies, they've been getting grants from the wind companies. And we have the data on it.
You got to ask yourself, after 73, is the count 73 whales still?
I think, well, 71, 73.
70 whales wash up between Massachusetts and New Jersey. The Mystic Aquarium says nothing, and Bedford Whaling says nothing, and the one that gets me is Greenpeace says nothing. Save the whales. This is how far-reaching this thing is.
One last question? This gentleman back here, or two.
Thank you. That's fascinating. I just want to recap because I want to make sure I walk away with a good understanding of your pitch. It seems you have a very strong argument that this stuff is ugly and expensive, and it doesn't do anything you claim for global warming. It's apparently debatable. So those are strong arguments that you have. You're also making the argument that it may do something very damaging to marine life, but you don't really have the data for that. And I think you said it's because you can't get it or some organization is not sharing it. Can you just clarify that part of your argument?
Oh, I maybe I misspoke. I mean, I have the data from NOAA. I have the letter from NOAA that says that they're very worried about the cod spawning. I just didn't have the data about a direct relationship between the sonar from the wind companies and whale deaths. That's what I don't have, and I just don't think it exists. I'm not saying that they're trying to hide that, but they're not doing necropsies on these animals, so they don't actually know what's causing the death. As far as the other kinds of environmental problems, we do have a lot of data out there. The North Sea, there's data to show that plankton is affected. There's data to show that, you know, with any kind of industrialization, you're going to decrease primary productivity. I don't know if people know what primary productivity is, but it's phytoplankton, so it's taking the energy from the sun and turning it into, you know, animal life. So it's actually sequestering carbon, and it's using the sun's energy, and then it releases oxygen. So it's just like so plankton are the trees of the ocean. And we would never want to cut down the Amazon forest to put up solar panels. And in the same way, people are not recognizing that's what we're doing by putting in these wind farms. And sometimes when I have mentioned this to people, they've said, well, the ocean is so big, there's no way these are really going to hurt primary productivity. But what they don't understand is most of primary productivity happens along the coasts, especially in places like Rhode Island and Massachusetts. You have the perfect temperatures, you have the mixing of the fresh water, you have the nutrients that you need. And so we have a lot of primary productivity right here off of Rhode Island, which is one of the reasons why we have such good fishing grounds, or historically have. So we're putting that all at risk by doing this. And there is data out there to show that, but people believe what they want to believe, it turns out.
To your question,
Yes. Oh, use
one thing, to your question here, there's been 71 or 72 large wells wash up since December, right in the areas where they are doing the sonar mapping of the ocean floor for the placement of wind turbines and cabling. There's been hundreds of smaller cetaceans. Now, NOAA says nothing to see here, it has nothing to do with the wind activity, what they're doing. But at the same time they're saying that, they've given out almost 800,000 takes of marine mammals, whales, dolphins, porpoises, and seals to these companies. So if you've given out almost 800,000 take permits for marine mammals to these very same companies that the whales and the dolphins are washing up dead, it just doesn't square. I don't know how to reconcile what they are doing with what they are saying.
Just a little more about the necropsies that you mentioned and trying to prove any kind of correlation. If you are not looking for a specific correlation, you're not going to find it. And somebody had a good example. I have a little dog who's very afraid of fireworks. And if they're fireworks and she hears them, she's going to bolt. If she runs into traffic, gets hit by a car, cause of death is a car wreck or car accident. But if you're not saying, well, why did she run into the street? You're not going to get the full answer. And yes, there are vessel strikes, but why are there vessel strikes?
There's also another really interesting phenomenon that may be related, but nobody has actually asked this question either. Back in 1996, they discovered this thing called rectified diffusion, which occurs when you have sonar waves at a certain frequency, usually the mid-frequency, which is about the same frequency that these ships are using. And at the tissue-blood interface, you'll get a actually mechanical enlargement of gas bubbles. And so these whales, when they go into the sonar, they could be experiencing something akin to the bends. And that will cause tissue damage, hemorrhaging, confusion, neurological symptoms. So that one paper actually was published in a peer-reviewed journal and suggested that even divers should be careful of going in front of sonar waves because of it, but people are not really trying to understand what's going on with the whales. And I have to say, there are people at NOAA who are worried about this, but people are worried also about their jobs. We've had a lot of people who have secretly come to us but are not willing to actually exchange emails. There's a lot of money being exchanged here, and it is not an easy discussion to have.
All right. It's one more question, and then we'll give Lisa a break.
Yeah, hi. I'm a little confused. I came here to get information about all sides of electricity. I'm a commercial fisherman. I'm retired from the commercial fisheries, but active in it still. I'm pragmatic. I come in the house, I hit the switch, I expect electricity. I'm not really too particular where it comes from. I'm listening to this, and I don't know who the bad guys are, the coal burners, the fossil fuel burners, or the windmill guys. And I'm trying to get some kind of take. I still want electricity when I hit the switch.
Well, they're the same people, is one answer to that. But we do need reliable electricity. It's actually a national security issue. And the other thing is it's actually some people consider electricity a human right. It's correlated with female education. So the cheaper electricity, the more females get educated. So electricity is incredibly important for so many reasons. And we do need a reliable grid. It's also a national security issue in terms of just being able to, terrorism, one of the most effective ways that terrorists could actually cause problems in our country is to actually attack our grid. So we do need reliable electricity, and wind power is not going to provide it. I mean, the small scale, I'm not an advocate of any particular solution right now, but small scale nuclear is probably our most reliable and our least environmentally harmful solution right now.
Okay, we've got one last question here, and then we're going to tie it up.
Hi, thank you so much for all your information, your dedication and hard work. Two things. One, I wanted to ask if there are fishermen in the audience. How concerned are they? That's one. Number two, you didn't speak too much about the substations. So the turbines are about a mile and a half apart from each other. So that means each turbine's connected to a substation, correct? Or no? Or is there many cables from different turbines that connect to the substations?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because one of the things that fishermen, well, I should let the fishermen answer this question, not me.
I'll tell you a quick story. A fisherman from Westport, a conch fisherman in Vineyard Sound, pulled his pots 2 years ago. The seismic boat that was measuring the bottom to run the electric cable up the Sakonnet River was a mile away. Every percussion that hit the bottom shook his boat. When he pulled the pots, the conch were dead. Now, if it's killing shellfish on the bottom, you can imagine what it's doing, disorienting a whale enough so they run into a ship.
I also
Am I worried about what's going on? Yes, 22 million square acres of bottom is gone to fishing from Maine to North Carolina. That's a great concern. To this day, we don't know whether we can fish in them. I don't know whether the story is true about the Coast Guard helicopter that turned back from a rescue off of Block Island because it wouldn't go into the wind farm and the 2 fishermen died. If that's true, we're still not established the territory that is going to be for rescues in these windmills. And if it's not established, the fishermen will not be insured.
Yeah, that's a big issue. I mean, they disrupt radar. We know that. We've never solved that problem. And helicopters can't go in. We have a member here who can talk about the dangers of helicopters. So the Coast Guard won't go in if there's fog with helicopters or ships at this point. And this is going to be 1,400 square miles. Right.
So the Coast Guard sent out a thing saying, warning in the beginning, that if you break down, if your ship breaks down, your boats, your trawlers, they can't find you. Not only can they not get you, they can't find you when you're in that area at all. And also, if there's an invading force, if anybody's coming in to get into your country, they can't find them either.
Right.
So, and that was just ignored, from what I understand, when the Coast Guard sent out that warning.
There was the 2 congressional members actually wrote a letter to the Admiral of the Coast Guard saying you're not doing your duty. You're not protecting what you need to be doing. But the agency still actually permitted the project.
All right.
And that was a Democrat and a Republican, so it was bipartisan.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And we have a host here, Sean Mullaney, who is picking up the tab for whoever would like to have a drink, and I think I need one after all this. So the bar is open. Thank you so much.
Oh, and we have petitions to sign. If people want to sign the petitions, they're right back here.